Good day. The first reporter was already discussed the quantitative research proposal, and this time I will discuss to you the qualitative research proposal, including the ethical and legal considerations.
Qualitative research proposal contains many of the same components as a quantitative proposal. There are some significant differences because the design of qualitative research is emergent. The proposal is less structured and more flexible, whereas a qualitative proposal begins with a broad picture of the intended study, the contour and details of the study, including the guiding questions and procedures, may change during the research process. A qualitative study responds to the context and setting of the study so that a proposal may not in the end be entirely aligned with what actually happens. The style of writing in a qualitative proposal is more personal and less formal than in a quantitative proposal. Quantitative proposal, this proposal tend to read more like a science report, whereas qualitative proposal have more narrative style and may read more like a story. The writer may refer to himself or herself using the first person, which would not be acceptable in quantitative proposal. Qualitative proposal should reflect the format and personalized style that will be used in a final product. Well-written qualitative research proposal helps others understand what is under study, why the study is important, how the inquiry will be conducted, and how the result will contribute to the body of knowledge. Brief outline of recommended components in a qualitative proposal are follows. First, introduction. Second, research procedure. And the third one, the data analysis or presentation. And all of this will be discussed one by one later. The fourth one is the importance or significance of the study. The fifth is the time schedule and budget. Sixth is the references, and last is the appendices. Introduction. I will discuss the purpose of the study. The introduction provides a clear statement of the purpose of the study, provides sufficient background information so that the reader can understand the purpose of the study and can place it in context. One might identify the research purpose or focus for a qualitative study from everyday practice and experience or from current social or political issues. Although not as common as in quantitative research, the focus may be derived from the theory with an intent to elaborate or modify the theory. The research purpose or focus of the study should be realistic, not too vast, and not too narrow. And now, let's proceed to the situating the self. As you discuss the purpose of the study and each background of the research, you should assess your own emotional involvement in the topic. Although you should be interested, perhaps even passionate about your topic, you must not be so emotionally involved that your own biases prevent you from adequate interpretation of the findings. One way to ensure that you consider this aspect to include in a section in the introduction that situates yourself in the study. Why are you interested in this topic? What personal background and knowledge do you bring to the study? And some scholars recommend an autobiographical section that addresses the potential for biases. And now, I will discuss the initial research questions. Once the overall focus of the study has been defined, you are ready to state the central research question and the sub-questions to be addressed. These questions lay out the conceptual structure of the inquiry. Qualitative research questions are typically about process or understanding. What happens? Why or how something happens? How those involved understand the experience, and what it means to them. These questions will help identify what observed or what to ask in interviews and direct the analysis, similar to how hypotheses in quantitative research direct the methodology. Let's proceed to the related literature or discourse. The literature review helps you to identify what is already known, how it relates to your question, how your study might contribute to greater understanding of the topic, and the potential theoretical framework that might inform the study. Reviewing the literature helps prevent duplication of research and helps avoid making mistakes in research design that others have made. There are two key differences in the literature review in quantitative and qualitative research studies. First, in a qualitative proposal, it is not assumed that the literature review is complete in the proposal. Reviewing literature in a qualitative study is an ongoing process and involves an interactive process throughout the study. Second, different kinds of information are considered appropriate to be included in a qualitative proposal. Hence, the call by some authors to call this section a review of discourse rather than a review of literature. Now, I will discuss the research procedure. This section describes the overall qualitative approach to be used in the study. Will it be a case study, an ethnographic study, or one of the other qualitative approaches? You may need to include a rationale for the selection of the specific research genre. One should then explain how each of the guiding questions will be addressed, what information will be used, how the information will be gathered, from what sources, and so forth. Here in a research procedure, you can find the site and selection of the sample, the role of the researcher, description of the setting, data collection methods, and the ethical issues. I will first discuss the site and selection of the sample. Qualitative proposals should contain a complete description of the site you will choose and the rationale for choosing that site. In this section, you should also provide information about the sample, the size, and the method for selecting the sample. Typically, samples in qualitative research are much smaller than those in quantitative research. The sample size might be one as in a case study, or it might involve a larger group, such as the entire faculty of a high school, or all the children of a particular elementary school. You may not know the exact number of individuals, cases, or documents you will eventually include in the study. You should approximate and explain how adjustments may be made as the study is underway. Proceed to the role of the researcher. In this section, the researcher describes the procedure for gaining entry to the chosen site and how a relationship of trust will be established with the participants. The researcher will specify his or her role as an observer and a participant observer, or some combination of the two. Data collection methods. One must describe the methods that will be used to collect the data to answer each research question. Indicate whether you will use observation, interviews, or documents. If you plan to use observation, tell what kind will be conducted and where they will be done. You might provide examples of questions that you will ask. If you plan to analyze documents, tell what documents you will use and how they will be collected. You will want to specify any audiovisual materials you will use, such as recordings, videotapes, and photographs. The quality of qualitative research is greatly improved by using multiple methods of collecting data. You also need to discuss how you will handle ethical issues such as obtaining informed consent and maintaining confidentiality. Issues related to the ethical treatment of human subjects are discussed later in this chapter. For the data analysis, the qualitative researcher will collect a massive amount of data from the interviews, observations, and field notes. You will need to tell how you will organize and analyze this data. This section should also address issues related to the study's validity and dependability and discuss the strategies that will be used to enhance credibility. For the significance of the study, you will need to convince the reader that your proposed study is important. Tell what can be learned as a result of the study and why that is worth knowing. Also, state the implications of the findings for educational practice and/or theory. For the time schedule and budget, as was true for the quantitative research proposal, you will need to estimate the time and costs involved in conducting the study. In qualitative research, requires a great deal of time in the field and at least an equal amount of time for data analysis. After you have the proposal, try to critique the qualitative proposal and see if you have addressed the following questions. For the introduction, number 1, is the purpose of the study clearly stated? Number 2, is there a description of the writer's background and motivation that might affect the collection and interpretation of the data? Number 3, is there a clearly stated central or guiding research questions? And last, does the review of literature provide context for the study? And for the research procedure, number 1, is there an explanation of how each of the guiding research questions will be addressed? Next, is there a rationale for choosing a particular site and a description of the steps to be taken in gaining access to the site? Third, is there information about the sample and the method for selecting the sample? Fourth, is there sufficient information about the data collection methods? Fifth, are multiple methods of collecting data planned? And last, have ethical issues been addressed? And for the analysis, first, is there an adequate description of how the data will be organized and interpreted? And lastly, is there a discussion of the significance of the study? Ethical and legal considerations. Strict adherence to ethical standards in planning and conducting both qualitative and quantitative research is most important. Researchers have obligations both to their subjects and to their profession. The proposal should state how informed consent confidentiality, and other ethical issues will be handled. Organizations such as the American Educational Research Association or the AERA and the American Psychological Association or the APA have formal ethical guidance for conducting research. AERA Code of Ethics incorporates a set of standards designed specifically to guide the work of researchers in education. The ethical standard for AERA, adopted in 1992 and currently under revision, state that as educational researchers, we should strive to maintain the integrity of our research community, and of all those with whom we have professional relations. We should pledge ourselves to do this by maintaining our own competence and that of people we induct into the field, by continually evaluating our research for its ethical and scientific adequacy, and by conducting our internal and external relations according to the highest ethical standards. Obligations to subjects. When employing human subjects in research, you must respect their rights, their dignity, privacy, and sensitivities. 11 aspects of researchers' obligations to participants are identified in the AERA standards. First, participants of their guardians in a research study have the right to be informed about the likely risks involved in the research and of potential consequences for participants, and to give their informed consent before participating in research. Educational researchers should communicate the aims of the investigation as well as possible to informants and participants, and appropriate representatives of institutions, and keep them updated about any significant changes in the research program. Second, informants and participants normally have the right to confidentiality, which ensures that the source of information will not be disclosed without the express permission of the informant. These rights should be respected when no clear understanding to the contrary had been reached. Researchers are responsible for taking appropriate precautions to protect the confidentiality of both participants and data to the full extent provided by law. And the third, honesty should characterize the relationship between researchers and participants and appropriate institutional representatives. Deception is discouraged. It should be used only when clearly necessary for scientific studies and should then be minimized. After the study, the researchers must explain to the participants and institutional representatives the reason for the deception. Number 4. Educational researchers should be sensitive to any local established institutional policies or guidelines for conducting research. Number 5. Participants have the right to withdraw from the study at any time. Number 6. Educational researchers should exercise caution to ensure that there is no exploitation for personal gain of research population or of institutional setting of research. Educational researchers should not use their influence over subordinates, students, or others to compel them to participate in research. Number 7. Researchers have the responsibility to be mindful of cultural, religious, gender, and other significant differences within the research population in the planning, conduct, and reporting of their research. Number 8. Researchers should carefully consider and minimize the use of research techniques that might have negative social consequences. For example, experimental intervention. 9. Educational researchers should be sensitive to the integrity of ongoing institutional activities and should alert appropriate institutional representatives of possible disturbance in such activities that may result from the conduct of the research. Number 10. Educational researchers should communicate their finding and the practical significance of the research in clear, straightforward, and appropriate language to relevant research populations, institutional representatives, and other stakeholders. And last, the number 11, informants and participants have a right to remain anonymous. This right should be respected with no clear understanding to the contrary has been reached. Researchers are responsible for taking appropriate precautions to protect the confidentiality of both participants and data. It should also be made clear to informants and participants that despite every effort made to preserve it, anonymity may be compromised. If we have the obligation to the subject, we have also the obligation to the profession. The researcher is also responsible to the consumers of research. Many research studies, in education as well as in other fields, are published in journals, monographs, books, and other media, and are referred to and used by professionals in the field. You are morally obligated to plan a study in such a way that the findings obtained would not result in offering misleading information. Even more, you are obligated to report exactly and honestly what the findings were. Reporting research in a misleading way is a serious abuse of a researcher's responsibility to the profession. Before beginning the research, it is recommended that a trusted colleague go through the research plan to look for potential sources of misleading outcomes. Legal obligations. Researchers' obligations to human subjects are not only incorporated into the professional ethics statements of professional organizations such as AERA and the APA, but also have been incorporated into federal regulations. Prior to 1974, there were very infamous studies in which researchers place subjects to definite risk in order to conduct their study. One of it was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, critiqued by Jones, 1982. Began in 1932 in Tuskegee, Alabama, to study the progression of the disease without treatment. Later, when penicillin was discovered, subjects were not treated because they were part of the control group in a comparative study of the treatment. Next is the Stanley Milgrams, 1963. It is a research on reaction to authority, deceived participants into administering electric shocks of up to 450 volts to accomplices who acted as though they were in pain. The participants later experienced stress and anxiety because they thought they had deliberately caused pain to others. Next is the Loud-Humphreys 1970. It is a study of homosexuality was another controversial study because of its deception and gross invasion of privacy. Studies such as this prompted the government to develop a unified set of regulations for research. In 1974, the federal government passed legislation that applies to all research performed by or under the general supervision of institutions receiving federal research funds. The National Research Act of 1974 requires that to ensure protection of participants, all proposed research involving human subjects be reviewed and approved by an authorized board before the study begins. This commission product produced the Belmont Report in 1979, which identified three essential ethical principles must be followed in all research with human subjects. First, protection of human subjects from harm, physical or mental. Next, respect for subjects' right to know the nature and purpose of the study, and their right to give or withhold consent to participate. The right of informed consent. 3. Respect for subjects' privacy. One stipulation of the law is that colleges and universities engaging in research with human subjects have an institutional review board or the IRB that must approve each proposal and certify that the research will be conducted in accordance with the law. An IRB consists of a group of scholars from various departments who are mandated to review proposals to ensure that they comply with ethical guidelines. These boards, also referred to as human subjects review boards, requires researchers to complete a lengthy form that provides a summary of the purpose and procedures of the proposed project and specific information about possible risks to subjects. This is an sample of summary safeguard statement. It is a list of questions that the researchers must answer. Let's have a closer look of this sample summary safeguard statement. As you can see, there is a project title. If you wish, and for the letter A, briefly describe in lay terms the general nature and purpose of the proposed research and where the study will take place. If the student research, indicate whether for a course, thesis, dissertation, or independent research. If the study is only for a course, please review the student research policy to ascertain if this project requires HSC review. For letter B, describe how subjects will be recruited, how many or estimate subjects will be involved in the research, and how much time will be required of them. For the letter C, check appropriate box for type of vulnerable subject population involved with investigation, specifically studies. You have the minor under age 18, fetuses, pregnant women, persons with mental disabilities, prisoners, persons with physical disabilities, economically or educational disadvantage, other vulnerable population. If any of the above are used, state the necessary for doing so. Please indicate the approximate age range of the minors to be involved. And for the letter D, list all the procedures to be used on human subjects or describe what subjects will do. If done during regular class time, explain what
what non-participants will do. If you are taping, explain that to her. Asterisk those you consider experimental. For those asterisk procedures, describe the usual methods, if any, that were considered and why they were not used. And for the letter E, state the potential risk. For example, the physical, psychological, financial, social, legal, or other connected with the proposed procedures. Briefly describe how risks to subjects are reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits. And for the letter F, describe methods for preserving confidentiality. How will data be recorded and stored with or without identifiers? If identifiers are used, describe the type, the name, job titles, number code, and etc. How long are identifiers kept? If a coding system is used, is there a link back to the subject's ID? If yes, where is the code list stored in relation of data and when is the code list destroyed? How will reports be written? In aggregate terms, or will individual responses be described? Will subjects be identified in reports? Describe disposition of tapes, films at the end of the study. If tapes are to be kept, indicate for how long and describe future uses of tapes. And for the letter G, what, if any, benefit is to be gained by the subjects? In the event of monetary gain, include all payment arrangement, amount of payment, and the proposed method of disbursement, including reimbursement of expenses. For the letter H, what information may accrue to science or society in general as a result of this work. Letter I, co-investigators, cooperating departments, cooperating institutions. If there are multiple investigators, please indicate only one person on the documentation of review and approval. As the principal investigator, others should be designated as co-investigators here. Co-investigators should sign here, pledging to conform to the sentences on page 3. If you are working with another institution, please indicate a letter of cooperation from the institution. Please provide the person's name and email. If the members of the review board are satisfied that the research will not place subjects at risk, they sign the approval form. Failure to follow all the procedures almost guarantee that the research will not be approved. In protecting subjects from harm, if the researcher can demonstrate that the physical, mental, and social risks involved in the proposed project are no greater than those encountered in daily life or during the performance of routine physical or psychological examinations or tests, the subjects are not considered at risk. If the subjects are at risk, then the researchers must be able to argue that the value of the knowledge that is likely to be gained exceeds the potential harm. All subjects will be fully informed of the risk in the procedures, and the voluntary and written consent of each subject will be obtained. And last, appropriate medical or other support services will be available to subjects who participate in the research. If these conditions are met, the IRB will usually approve the proposed work. Typically, there is no appeal procedure from an IRB. Another stipulation of the National Research Act is that the researchers must obtain informed consent from research participants. Consent should be, first, voluntary, next, informed, and third, given by a competent individual. Obtaining consent is more than simply having a potential research participant sign a form. An informed consent statement has two purposes. First, to enable potential research subjects to make an informed choice as to their participation in the study, and second, to document their decision to participate. To make an informed choice, potential participants must understand the purpose of the study, the procedures, the risks, and benefits of the project, as well as the obligation of both the participants and the researcher. Informed consent is documented by the use of written consent form approved by the institution's IRB and signed by the subject or the subject's legally authorized representative. In some cases, it may be argued that prior knowledge of the purposes of the study would bias the results. Participants may change their normal behavior, or they may respond in the way they think the researchers expect. Thus, researchers sometimes do not tell participants the true purpose of the study, but instead use deception. There are two types of deception. First, the passive deception. Subjects are not told untruths, but are simply not given sufficient information about the purpose of the study. Second is the active deception, in which subjects are deliberately given misinformation about the true purpose of the study. The true purpose is completely different from what the researcher tells the subject. Guidelines state that the deception must be justified in terms of benefits that outweigh the risk. It is still important to maintain the voluntary nature of participation even if the purposes are not fully or accurately presented prior to the procedures. Of informed consent from people who are not considered capable of representing themselves is problematic. If their competence limits their ability to give consent, researchers should obtain these individuals' assent to participate and the consent for their participation from their guardians. Researchers facing this problem are advised to consult with the chair of their IRB or with a legal counsel of their institution or organization. Here is an example of informed consent statement. There is an information where describe all procedures, preferably in chronological order, which will be employed in the study. Point out. Next is also we have risk. List the foreseeable risks or discomforts, if any, of each of the procedures to be used in the study and any measures that will be used to minimize the risk. Next is the emergency medical treatment if applicable. In the unlikely event of physical injury resulting from your participation in this research, emergency medical treatment will be provided at no cost to you. Be certain that you immediately notify the researcher if you are injured. If you require additional medical treatment, you will be responsible for the cost. No other compensation will be provided if you are injured in this research. Next, we have the benefit. So, list the benefits you anticipate will be achieved from this research to the subjects, others, or the body of knowledge. And also confidentiality. Describe the extent, if any, to which confidentiality of records identifying the subjects will be maintained, or explain when and how a confidentiality will be broken. We have also the compensation. For participating in this study, you will receive what is the amount. Other ways to earn the same amount of credit are, if you are withdraw from the study prior to its completion, you will receive. Then, we have also the contact. If you have questions at any time about the study or the procedures, or you experience adverse effects as a result of participating in the study, you may contact the researcher. So, as a researcher, you will state your name, the address, the phone number, and the email. And if you feel have not been treated according to the description in this form, or your rights as a participant in research have been violated during the course of this project, you may contact the Office of the Indiana University Bloomington Human Subject Committee. So, they will also state the address, phone number, and the email. And for the participation, your participation in the study is voluntary. You may refuse to participate without penalty. If you decide to participate, you may withdraw from the study at any time without penalty and without loss of benefits. And lastly, the consent. So, I have read this form and received a copy of it. I had all my questions answered to my satisfaction. I agree to take part in this study. So the subject will write your signature, the date. Then, if your participant have a guardian, also write that I agree to allow my child, the name of the child, to take the part of the study, then the parent's signature and the date. And also, it has the witness signature and the date. The individuals would read and sign this informed consent statement if they are willing to participate. Our rights to privacy. Respect for privacy is the heart of the conduct of ethical research with human participants. A piece of federal legislation called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, also called the Buckley Amendment, was designed to protect the privacy of students' educational records. It specifies that any data that identifies a student may not be made available unless written permission is obtained from the student or a parent or legal guardian. The consent specifies that data may be accessed for what purpose and by whom. Participants in research must be protected from the risk that information they give during a study could be released to outsiders where it might have damaging consequences. Two aspects of the privacy issues are, first, anonymity. Anonymity refers to the process of protecting the identity of specific individuals. No identification is attached to the data obtained, not even the researcher knows who contributed the data. Next is the confidentiality. Refers to the process of keeping the information obtained from an individual during a study secret and private. There is broad professional agreement that all subjects have an inherent right to privacy. If the researcher does not need to collect the individual's name and other identifying information, it is recommended that the information not be collected. In general, It is recommended that only the principal researcher and those staff members who must know individual data for work-related purposes have access to them. If students or colleagues are to be given access to the data, or if the data are to be placed in an archive, then it is the responsibility of the principal researcher to remove all personal identifying information from those files. For research funded by the Department of Education, the investigator must provide assurance for the secure storage and maintenance of all names and other identifying information. If the research project collects any personally incriminating or socially damaging information, this obligation is even more important. Failure to keep information of this type secure could lead to sanction under the federal regulation, disqualification from further grant support, or to civil suit for personal damages. The five major categorical exemptions as set forth in the Federal Document Protection of Human Subjects, Public Welfare 1993 are as follows. First, research conducted in established or commonly accepted educational setting involving normal educational practices such as research on regular and special education, instructional and strategies, research on the effectiveness of or the comparison among instructional techniques, curricula, or classroom management methods. Second, research involving the use of educational tests, cognitive diagnostic aptitude achievement, survey procedures, interview procedures, or observation of public behavior, unless information obtained is recorded in such a manner that human subjects can be identified directly or through identifiers linked to the subjects, and any disclosure of the human subjects' responses outside the research could reasonably place the subjects at risk of criminal or civil liability or be damaging to the subject's financial standing, employability, or reputation. Third, research involving the use of educational tests, cognitive diagnostic aptitude achievement, survey procedures, interview procedures, or observation of public behavior that is not exempt under paragraph 2 of this section, if the human subjects are elected or appointed public officials or candidates for public office. Second, federal statutes requires without exemption that the confidentiality of the personally identifiable information will be maintained throughout the research and thereafter. Fourth, research involving the collection of study of existing data, documents, records, pathological specimens, or diagnostic specimens, if these sources are publicly available or if the information is recorded by the investigator in such a manner that subjects cannot be identified directly or through identifiers linked to the subject. And last, research and demonstration projects which are conducted by or subject to the approval of Department of Agency heads and which are designed to study, evaluate, or otherwise examine public benefit or service programs. Next, procedures for obtaining benefits or services under those programs. Third, possible changes in or alternative to those programs or procedures, or possible changes in methods, level of payment for benefits or services under those programs. So, these regulations exempt much of educational research from direct federal regulations. The IRBs remain in place. An institution may elect to continue regulations that are more restrictive in character or broader in scope than the federal regulations.
This is Christine May Villarba, and that's all my report in qualitative research proposal and ethical and legal considerations. Thank you for listening.